My fiancé left me for my stepsister after she proposed to him. You're not enough for him, she smirked. When their perfect life crumbled, he begged me to take him back. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My name is Audrey. I'm 31 years old, and I'm an HVAC technician. For the past 8 years, that's been my life, crawling through attics in the blistering summer heat, wrestling with furnaces in freezing basements. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest. It's real. There's a profound satisfaction that comes from fixing something broken with your own 2 hands, from bringing comfort and relief into someone's home. I've always been proud of that, proud of the life I've meticulously built for myself, piece by piece, paycheck by paycheck. It's a life that feels solid, dependable. Mine. Until recently, I thought I was sharing that solid, dependable life with the man I was going to marry. His name was Julian. He's 29, a physical therapist at a high-end sports medicine clinic downtown, one of those places with sleek glass walls and fancy equipment. We had been together for 4 years, and for the last 2, we'd been living together in a cozy little house I'd put a down payment on before I even met him. This past February, on a cold, clear night, he got down on one knee and asked me to be his wife. It felt like the final, perfect piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The life I had worked so hard for was finally complete. Everything, from the outside, was perfect. We immediately dove into wedding planning. He knew I'd always dreamed of a big, traditional wedding, something timeless. We spent hours looking at venues online, finally settling on that beautiful old stone church on the hill, the one with the incredible stained glass windows. We even put a deposit down for a reception at the local country club for the following October. It felt so official, so real. My parents were over the moon. My dad, a retired plumber, always respected Julian. He'd say, "He works with his hands, Audrey, just in a different way. He heals people." My mom, well, she just loved how Julian could make me laugh, even after a grueling 12-hour shift. His family seemed to like me well enough, too. They were always polite, always cordial at holidays and birthdays. It was all so easy. The kind of comfortable, predictable ease that you mistake for unbreakable strength. Our life had a rhythm, a steady beat. I'd be up before the sun, grabbing my heavy tool bag, my steel-toed boots thudding on the hardwood floor. I'd spend my days diagnosing complex electrical issues or hauling heavy condenser units onto rooftops. He had a more civilized schedule at the clinic. In the evenings, we'd converge back at our little house. Sometimes I'd cook, sometimes he would. We'd sit on the couch, my tired feet propped up, and we'd talk. We talked about everything and nothing. We were planning a honeymoon to Italy, debating between the Amalfi Coast and Tuscany. We were arguing playfully about what kind of dog to get once the wedding was over. I wanted a big, goofy golden retriever, he wanted a sleek, intelligent German shepherd. It was all so wonderfully normal. The future felt like a tangible thing, a solid object I could hold in my hands, as real and dependable as the torque wrench in my truck. But the thing about foundations is that you can't always see the cracks forming beneath the surface. You don't know that the ground beneath your feet is hollow until you take one wrong step and the entire world gives way, plunging you into darkness. That day, the day everything changed, started like any other Tuesday. I had a monster of a job over in the industrial park, retrofitting an entire warehouse with a new, energy-efficient HVAC system. It was grueling, filthy work. I spent hours on a scissor lift, my arms aching as I wrestled with heavy ductwork. By the time I clocked out, I was covered in a thick layer of dust and grime, my muscles screaming in protest. All I could think about during the 30-minute drive home was a scalding hot shower and an ice-cold beer. The simple pleasures. I pulled into my driveway just after 6. The first thing I noticed was Julian's sleek, silver sedan. My stomach gave a little lurch. That was wrong. Tuesdays were his late nights. He'd had administrative meetings every Tuesday for the past year, or at least, that's what he always told me. A tiny, cold knot of unease began to form in my gut, but I tried to push it away. Don't be silly, Audrey. The meeting probably got cancelled. I walked in the front door, letting it click shut behind me. I dropped my tool bag by the entryway. It landed with a heavy, metallic thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the house. It was too quiet. The TV wasn't on. No music was playing. I found him in the living room, sitting on the edge of our comfortable, overstuffed sofa. He was still in his work polo and khakis, just staring blankly at the dark screen of the television. There was a tension in his shoulders, a coiled energy that made the hairs on my arms stand up. He looked up as I entered, and his expression, it was a strange cocktail of panic and resignation. He looked like a man who had been caught, a man who had finally run out of road. It was the look someone has right before they detonate a bomb in the middle of your life. "Hey," I said, forcing a casualness into my voice that I didn't feel. "You're home early. Did the meeting get cancelled?" He didn't answer right away. He just shook his head slowly, his eyes darting around the room, landing on everything but me. He seemed to be studying a spot on the wall just over my shoulder with intense focus. "Audrey," he said, and his voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. "We need to talk. Can you sit down?" You know that tone. It's the tone that sucks all the air out of a room. It's the sound of a prelude to a nightmare. The weariness from my long day evaporated, replaced by a sharp, adrenaline-fueled dread. I didn't sit on the couch with him. I sat in the armchair across from him, creating a space between us. I needed that space. My heart started to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. "Okay," I said slowly. "What's up, Julian? Is everything all right? You're scaring me." He finally met my gaze. He took a long, shuddering breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into icy water. And then he just said it. No context. No warning. No attempt to soften the blow. Just 4 words that shattered my entire existence. "Scarlett proposed to me." For a solid 5 seconds, my brain refused to process the sentence. The words hung in the air between us, nonsensical, like a line from a foreign film without subtitles. Scarlett, my stepsister, proposed to him. It was a combination of words so illogical, so utterly absurd, that my first, involuntary reaction was to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a short, sharp, bewildered bark of a laugh. This had to be a joke. A prank. Some bizarre, twisted story he'd cooked up. "What?" I managed to say, a confused, brittle smile still plastered on my face. That's a really weird joke, Julian. What's the punchline?" But he wasn't smiling. His face was pale and serious, his eyes filled with a miserable cocktail of guilt and resolve. He was waiting for me to understand. And that's when the laughter died in my throat. That's when the block of ice that had formed in my stomach began to spread, chilling me from the inside out. My mind, in a desperate attempt to make sense of the senseless, started frantically connecting dots I hadn't even realized existed. Scarlett. My father had married her mother, a flighty woman named Renee, about 10 years ago. Scarlett and I were in our late teens at the time, already set in our ways. We couldn't have been more different. She was the prom queen, the effortlessly popular girl who always had a string of admirers trailing behind her. I was the girl in grease-stained jeans, the one who spent her weekends taking apart lawnmower engines just to see how they worked. We were never close. We were civil at obligatory family dinners, exchanging pleasantries over turkey and mashed potatoes, but that was the extent of it. We were not friends. We were not sisters. We were just 2 people who happened to share a parent. Since when? The question came out as a strangled whisper. I barely recognized my own voice. Since when have you been seeing her? He had the cowardice to look away then, his gaze dropping to the floor. He mumbled something I couldn't hear. What was that? I demanded, my voice gaining a hard, sharp edge. Look at me and say it. He flinched, but he looked up. For a little while, he said, his voice weak. Define a little while, Julian, I pressed, the icy numbness spreading through my veins, making my fingertips tingle. How long have you been lying to my face? He finally broke. The whole pathetic story came tumbling out. Since March, he confessed, the words barely audible. March. The gears in my head ground to a halt and then spun backwards with sickening speed. He had proposed to me at the end of February. We had been engaged for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And then he started sneaking around behind my back with my own stepsister. This wasn't some drunken mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, sustained campaign of deception. These were planned secret lunches. These were clandestine meetings. While I was at work, sweating and straining to build our future, he was destroying it. While I was showing off my engagement ring to my friends, he was with her. And the worst part, the absolute cruelest part, was the final piece of his confession. He hadn't just accepted her proposal as some hypothetical thing. He was telling me that this was his new reality. He had said yes. He was choosing her. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, he was delivering a verdict. I just stared at him, the man I thought I knew. The man I had loved with my whole heart. The man whose ring was still on my finger, a cold, heavy weight. He was sitting on our couch, in the home I owned, telling me he was leaving me to marry someone else. Someone from my own family. Suddenly, a flood of memories replayed in my mind, but this time, they were cast in a new, sinister light. The late nights that were supposedly for administrative meetings. The sudden, increased interest he had in attending my family functions. The secretive phone calls he would take out on the back porch, his voice low and hushed. The way he'd been so emotionally distant lately, which I had foolishly attributed to the stress of wedding planning. It wasn't stress. It was the profound guilt of a man living a double life. He had already checked out of our relationship months ago, he just hadn't had the courage or the decency to tell me. A hot, furious energy began to surge through me, burning away the icy shock. It wasn't a wild, screaming rage. It was a cold, quiet fury that brought with it a terrifying sense of clarity. I saw him for exactly what he was, a weak, spineless coward. I stood up from the armchair, my movements stiff and deliberate. Take it off, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Audrey, please, just let me explain everything, he started, getting to his feet as well, taking a step towards me. Don't you dare come near me, I snapped, and he froze. There is nothing to explain. You have explained everything perfectly. Now, take off my ring. He hesitated, his eyes pleading. But he saw something in my face that told him there was no room for negotiation. Slowly, shamefully, he twisted the simple silver band off his finger. The ring I had spent weeks picking out, the one I thought symbolized our shared future. He held it out for a moment, then placed it gently on the wooden coffee table that sat between us. The sight of it lying there, so small and utterly meaningless now, made the dam of my composure finally break. 3 months' salary, I said, my voice trembling with a white-hot rage I didn't know I was capable of. That's what that little piece of metal cost me. 3 months of crawling through filth and breaking my back. And you just toss it aside. Like it's nothing. Like the last 4 years were nothing. He just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no words came out. He looked pathetic. A shell of the man I thought I loved. You have 1 hour, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steely command. I'm going for a drive. I'm going to call my sister. When I get back in 1 hour, I want you and every last thing you own out of my house. Do you understand me? An hour? Audrey, that's not enough time. Please, let's just talk about this like adults. We are past talking, I said, grabbing my keys from the hook by the door. You had your chance to talk for the last 3 months. Your time is up. 1 hour, Julian. Or I'll call my father, and I promise you, you don't want that. The threat of my dad, a man of few words but intimidating presence, was enough. I saw the fear flicker in his eyes. I walked out the door without looking back, slamming it shut behind me. The sound echoed in the quiet street. I fumbled with the key to my truck, my hands shaking so violently I dropped them twice. Finally, I got the engine started and peeled out of my own driveway. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. The tears I had been holding back finally came, hot and blinding. I had to pull over to the side of the road, my whole body racked with shuddering sobs. I called Beatrice. I could barely speak, the words were just choked, guttural sounds of pain. She understood enough. I'm on my way, she said, her voice fierce and protective. Don't you move, Audrey. I'm coming. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, just letting the grief wash over me. When I finally ran out of tears, a cold numbness set in. I drove for exactly 60 minutes, circling the familiar streets of my town, which now felt alien and hostile. When I finally pulled back into my driveway, his silver sedan was gone. He'd left 3 large duffel bags and 2 cardboard boxes sitting on my front porch. A pathetic monument to a 4-year relationship. Just like that, he was gone. A ghost. A bad dream. For years of my life, packed up and discarded on my doorstep. I walked past his things and into my house. The silence was heavier now, thick with absence. It felt like my home had been hollowed out. The ring was still sitting on the coffee table, a tiny, gleaming accusation. I picked it up, the metal cold against my skin. I walked into my bedroom, opened my sock drawer, and buried the little black box underneath a pile of wool socks. Out of sight, out of mind. Or so I hoped. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to start picking up the pieces of a life that had just been systematically dismantled. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. A thick, gray fog of grief and disbelief settled over me, and I couldn't seem to find my way out of it. I took a few days off work, telling my supervisor, Sal, that I had a family emergency. It wasn't a lie. My family had just been imploded. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just wandered through the empty rooms of my house, which suddenly felt huge and alien. Every corner held a memory, a ghost. Julian's favorite coffee mug, the one with the chipped rim, was still in the dish drainer. The worn-out fleece blanket he always used on the couch was still draped over the armrest, holding the faint scent of his cologne. These small, mundane traces of him felt like tiny, serrated knives twisting in my gut. I spent hours just sitting on the floor, staring at the walls, trying to pinpoint the exact moment it had all gone wrong. Had I missed the signs? Was I a fool? The questions circled in my head, relentless and cruel. On the 3rd day, I decided I couldn't live with his ghost anymore. I started packing. With a cold, methodical fury, I went through the house and gathered every last remnant of him. The toothbrush still in the holder. The half-empty bottle of shaving cream in the shower. The stack of car magazines on the nightstand. I threw it all into black garbage bags. It was a brutal, painful process, like performing surgery on my own life without anesthesia. When I finally went back to work, I was a wreck. My mind was a million miles away. I was running on autopilot, my body going through the motions while my brain was trapped in a loop of betrayal and pain. That Wednesday, I was wiring a new control panel for a commercial freezer unit. It was intricate work that required absolute focus. My mind drifted. I was thinking about the last happy memory I had with Julian, a weekend trip we'd taken just before the engagement. My hand slipped. A live wire brushed against a grounded panel. There was a bright blue flash, a loud crack, and the smell of ozone. The whole building's power flickered. I jerked my hand back, my heart pounding in my chest. I was lucky I was wearing my insulated gloves. Sal came running over, his face grim. He took one look at my pale, shaken face and the scorch mark on the panel. "Go home, Audrey," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Don't come back until your head is screwed on straight. I can't afford to lose my best technician." The humiliation was almost as bad as the fear. Back at home, the loneliness was a physical presence. As if that wasn't punishment enough, his family began their assault. Less than 24 hours after he'd left, the first text came from his mother, Carol. I still have it saved, a digital scar. "Audrey, I know this must be difficult, but I am so happy for Julian. He has found his true soulmate. Scarlett was always the one for him, even back in high school. I hope you can find it in your heart to be happy for them. Be happy for them." The words were so dripping with condescending pity, so utterly devoid of compassion, that I felt the air leave my lungs. A few hours later, a long voicemail from his father, a man who always prided himself on being a straight shooter. He went on and on in a rambling monologue about how things happen for a reason and that Julian and Scarlett shared a deep, unbreakable bond and a real history. He said I seemed like a nice girl, but sometimes love just finds its own way home. As if our 4 years were a temporary detour. As if my love was an obstacle. Then his sister texted, gushing about how she'd never, ever seen Julian so genuinely happy and that with Scarlett, he was finally himself. She said, "True love always wins in the end." They were all performing in the same sick play, casting Julian and Scarlett as the star-crossed lovers and me as the disposable supporting character. Not one of them offered an apology. Not one of them acknowledged the cruelty, the betrayal, the sheer destruction of what they had all, just weeks before, pretended to celebrate. They were erasing me from the narrative, rewriting history to fit their new, more exciting story. I couldn't take it. With trembling fingers, I blocked every single one of them. Their numbers, their social media profiles. I built a digital wall to keep their poison out. My family, bless them, was my fortress. My mom was heartbroken for me. She cried on the phone, mourning the wedding that would never be, the son-in-law she had grown to love. My dad's reaction was quieter but more terrifying. He came over, sat at my kitchen table, and just stared at his hands. "Just say the word, Audrey," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I'll go have a talk with him. Man to man." I knew what his talks meant. I had to gently convince him that getting arrested for assault wouldn't solve anything, though a dark part of me was grateful for his righteous anger. My older sister, Beatrice, was my absolute savior. She didn't wait for me to call. She just showed up. The first time, she came with 2 large pizzas and a 6-pack of my favorite IPA. She didn't offer platitudes or empty advice. She just sat with me on the couch while I cried and raged and picked at a slice of pizza. She listened. And when I was all cried out, she just looked at me and said, "He's a spineless piece of garbage, Audrey. And you are so much better off." She came over every other day for 2 weeks. She helped me finish packing Julian's things, turning a painful chore into a mission. We taped up the last of the boxes, and she loaded them into her SUV. She drove them over to his mother's house and left them on the front porch, rang the doorbell, and drove away without a word. It felt like an exorcism. She confessed to me one night that she'd never fully trusted Julian. There was always something a little weak about him, she said. Something I couldn't put my finger on. He always seemed to be performing, you know? Like he was playing the part of a good fiancé. She had seen the cracks long before I had. Work became my sanctuary. The guys on my crew knew something was up, but they were respectful. They didn't pry. They just made sure my coffee cup was always full and occasionally left a donut on the dashboard of my truck. In my line of work, you don't talk about heartbreak. You show up, you do the job, and you have each other's backs. That quiet, unspoken support was exactly what I needed. I needed to focus on schematics and wiring diagrams, on things that made logical sense. Things I could fix. About 3 weeks after the explosion, I made the mistake of logging onto social media. And there it was. The official engagement announcement. It was a professional photo shoot, set in a picturesque park downtown. There they were, Julian and Scarlett. Him in a crisp button-down shirt, her in a flowing white dress, both of them beaming with a manufactured joy that made me feel sick. He was looking at her with the same adoring expression he used to reserve for me. And the ring on her finger, of course, it was bigger than mine. A flashy, obnoxious diamond that screamed, "Look at us." It was such a classic, pathetic move. A desperate attempt to prove that his new life, his new love, was an upgrade. The comments underneath were a nauseating chorus of congratulations. Destiny at last. True love always finds its way back. So happy you two found each other again. They were celebrating the demolition of my life as if it were a romantic comedy. I felt a strange detachment reading it all. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was mixed with something new, pity. I pitied him. I pitied his weakness, his desperate need for validation. It was then that I started to truly believe what Beatrice had been telling me all along. I had dodged a bullet. A cannonball, more like it. Any man who could throw away 4 years of shared history, of love and partnership, for a nostalgic high school fantasy was not a man capable of real commitment. It hurt like hell, but it was better to learn that lesson now than after a wedding, a mortgage, and 2 kids. Better to find out before our lives were legally and financially entangled in a way that would require a messy divorce to unravel. My sister was right. His actions said everything about his character and nothing about my worth. After that, I deactivated my accounts. I didn't need to watch them build their new life on the rubble of mine. I needed to focus on my own reconstruction. I poured everything I had into my work. I took every overtime shift, every weekend project that came my way. The work was hard, but it was honest, and it kept my mind from spiraling. The extra money started to pile up in my savings account, a tangible symbol of my independence and resilience. For the first time in months, I felt my footing begin to stabilize. I was starting to feel like myself again. And then, just when I thought I had finally found some peace, I received a text message that was so audacious, so utterly detached from reality, that it made me question everything I thought I knew about the limits of human shamelessness. Julian, my ex-fiancé, the man who had shattered my heart and my trust, had the unmitigated gall to ask me for money. To help pay for his wedding. To my stepsister. No, I am not making this up. Let me try to explain this calmly, because even now, my hands start to shake a little when I think about it. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was on a break, sitting in my truck, when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. My first thought was that it was a potential client, so I opened it. The message was short, "Hey Audrey. Hope you're doing well. I wanted to talk to you about something important." A cold feeling washed over me. I knew, somehow, that it was him. I had blocked his number, his social media, everything. He must have gotten a new phone or was using an app. My first instinct was to block this number too, to just delete it and pretend it never happened. But a morbid curiosity, a desire to see just how low he could sink, got the better of me. After everything he had already done, how much more damage could he possibly do? So, against my better judgment, I replied. "What do you want, Julian?" His reply came back almost instantly. He told me that he and Scarlett were getting married next month. He said the planning was more expensive than they had anticipated. And then he dropped the bomb, "We're a little short on cash for the final payment to the caterer. I was wondering if you could help us out." I had to read it 3 times. Then I turned my phone off and on again, thinking it had to be a glitch. But the message was still there. He wasn't asking for a loan. The words he used were "help us out." He was asking for a handout. To pay for his wedding. To my stepsister. The wedding that should have been ours. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me speechless. This man had detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of my life, and now he was coming back to sift through the rubble to see if I had any spare change. And then came the part that was somehow even worse, the part that truly showcased his depraved, manipulative mind. He added another text immediately after: "Scarlett doesn't know I'm asking you this, so don't worry. It'll just be our secret." Our secret. As if the fact that he was now lying to his new fiancée was supposed to be a point in his favor. As if I should be comforted by the knowledge that he wasn't just a heartless cheat, but also a sneaky liar to the new woman in his life. He saw me as a bank. A secret slush fund. A fool. I just stared at my phone screen, my mind reeling. For a good 10 minutes, I was paralyzed, caught between hysterical laughter and incandescent rage. Was this a sick joke? Was one of his friends pranking me? But the tone was so earnest, so completely serious. In his twisted, self-absorbed world, this was a perfectly reasonable request. I wanted to call him. I wanted to scream until my throat was raw. I wanted to ask him what kind of soulless creature he had become. But I knew that's what he wanted. He wanted a reaction. He wanted drama. He wanted to pull me back into his orbit. I refused to give him the satisfaction. Instead, I channeled my rage into a single, cold text message. Why in the ever-loving hell would you think that I, of all the people on this planet, would give you a single dime to help you pay for your wedding to the woman you left me for? His reply was a masterclass in manipulative psychobabble. Because we shared 4 years, Audrey. I know you're a good person deep down. I know you want to see the people you once cared about be happy. And even though things didn't work out for us, I was hoping you'd still want me to have the wedding of my dreams. And then he twisted the knife. Besides, I know you've been doing really well at work, picking up all those extra jobs. You can afford it. That last part sent a chill down my spine. How did he know about my work? Was he talking to mutual acquaintances? Stalking my online presence? The thought was deeply unsettling. He was trying to guilt me, to paint me as a bitter, selfish shrew if I refused. As if saying no would make me a bad person, rather than a sane person with an ounce of self-respect. According to his logic, my nobility should compel me to finance the happiness of the man who broke my heart. He went on, explaining that Scarlett's event planning business wasn't doing well and they had already paid non-refundable deposits to several vendors. They just needed a few thousand to cover the gap. A few $1,000s. A casual request, as if he were asking to borrow a cup of sugar. A few thousand of my hard-earned dollars to pay for the canapés at his wedding reception. That was it. I was done being calm. I was done being the bigger person. I typed up my response, my thumbs flying across the screen. Let me make this perfectly clear, Julian. You must have completely and utterly lost your mind. The fact that you have the audacity to even ask me this is staggering. Asking your ex-fiancée, the woman whose life you blew apart, for money to marry her stepsister is the most pathetic, shameless, and delusional thing I have ever heard in my entire life. His reaction was instantaneous. The victim act came on full force. I was only asking because I thought you cared about my happiness. I thought you were mature enough to have moved on from our breakup and could help me out as a friend. A friend. He wanted me to be his friend. According to his twisted logic, my maturity was measured by my willingness to be his personal ATM. My forgiveness was contingent on a wire transfer. I typed my final message to him. Delete my number. Lose it. Never contact me again. If you're short on money, go ask your mother, the one who is so thrilled you found your soulmate. Better yet, maybe you should get a second job and learn how to pay for your own damn life instead of expecting the women you betray to clean up your messes. He sent one last pathetic zinger. You're just being bitter. If you had really moved on, you'd help me, just to prove you don't hold any grudges. More manipulation, wrapped in a cheap imitation of psychological insight. I didn't reply. I just held my finger down on his contact and pressed block. Then I did it again on the messaging app. I sat there in my truck for a long time, the silence of the cab buzzing in my ears. The arrogance. The entitlement. The profound, bottomless selfishness of the man. We had been together for 4 years, and in the end, he didn't know me at all. If he really thought, even for a second, that I would finance his wedding to another woman, then our entire relationship had been a lie built on his complete and utter inability to see me as a real person. But at least now, I knew with absolute certainty, ending things with him wasn't a tragedy. It was the best thing that had ever happened to me. A few months passed. I focused on my work, on my friendships, on rebuilding the quiet, steady life he had tried to demolish. I started seeing someone new. His name is Grant, and he's an architect. He's everything Julian wasn't: calm, kind, honest, and utterly drama-free. We met when his office hired my company to consult on the HVAC system for a new building they were designing. He was smart, funny, and he actually listened when I talked. He was fascinated by my work, asking intelligent questions instead of just nodding along. We started with coffee, which turned into dinner, which turned into a comfortable, easy relationship that felt like coming home. He knows the whole sordid story with Julian. I laid it all out for him on our third date, figuring it was better to be upfront. He didn't flinch. He just listened patiently and, when I was done, he just said, "I'm so sorry you went through that. You didn't deserve any of it." There was no judgment, no competition. Just simple, human compassion. Being with him felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a toxic, smoke-filled room for 4 years. We were taking things slow, building something real, brick by brick. Then, just when my life had finally found its peaceful new rhythm, Beatrice called. It was a Tuesday night. I was at home, cooking dinner with Grant. "Are you sitting down?" she asked, her voice tight with a strange energy. "Yeah, why? What's up?" I asked, stirring a pot of pasta sauce. "I just got off the phone with our cousin Sarah," she said. "You are not going to believe this. It's about Julian and Scarlett." I felt my stomach clench. "What about them?" "It's over," Beatrice said, and I could hear the smirk in her voice. "They broke up. And you will never, ever guess why." I waited, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Scarlett was cheating on him," Beatrice announced, drawing out the words for maximum dramatic effect. "And not just with one guy, Audrey. With, like, half the single men in the Tri-County area." I had to sit down. Grant looked at me with concern, and I just held up a hand, my mind reeling. Beatrice launched into the story, which she had gotten in glorious, gossipy detail from our cousin, who was friends with one of Scarlett's now former best friends. Apparently, Scarlett had never been faithful. She viewed monogamy as a charming but antiquated suggestion, not a rule. For her, Julian wasn't a life partner, he was a status symbol. He was the one that got away in high school, and winning him back from me was the ultimate ego boost. Once she had won, the game was over, and she was bored. The whole thing had come to a spectacular, messy end. One of the other men she was seeing, a personal trainer at her gym, found out about Julian. Instead of just breaking it off, he decided to go nuclear. He messaged Julian on social media, sending him an entire dossier of evidence, screenshots of their explicit text messages, photos of them on dates, even a short video of them kissing in a parking lot. It was undeniable. When Julian confronted her, waving his phone in her face, Scarlett didn't even have the decency to lie or apologize. According to the story, she just laughed. She told him he was a naive fool if he ever thought she was going to settle down and play house. She called him boring and predictable. She said their whole epic romance had just been a fun way to pass the time, but now she was ready to move on. She had used him, chewed him up, and was now spitting him out without a second thought. The karmic justice of it all was so perfect, so poetic, it was almost overwhelming. The man who had thrown away a 4-year relationship built on loyalty and trust had been played for a fool by a woman who didn't know the meaning of the word. Beatrice continued, her voice filled with grim satisfaction. After the confrontation, Julian had apparently had a complete and total meltdown. He had begged. He had pleaded. He had cried. The same man who had walked out of my life with cold indifference was now on his knees, begging a serial cheater to take him back. She, of course, found his desperation pathetic. She packed her designer suitcases that very night and moved in with another one of her boyfriends, leaving Julian alone in the expensive apartment they had just rented together, an apartment he definitely couldn't afford on his physical therapist's salary alone. Beatrice had heard from a friend that he'd had to get a lawyer involved just to break the lease without a massive penalty. He was left with nothing. A broken engagement, a mountain of debt, and the crushing public humiliation of his own terrible choices. I hung up the phone, my mind buzzing. Grant put his arms around me. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, a slow, strange smile spreading across my face. "I'm better than okay," I said. I wasn't happy that he was hurting. But I felt vindicated. I felt like the universe had finally balanced its books. He had chosen the flashy, exciting fantasy, and it had turned out to be a cheap, hollow nightmare. He was now living back at home with his mother, the same woman who had so eagerly endorsed his betrayal of me. Suddenly, Scarlett wasn't the soulmate anymore, she was a villain. It was amazing how quickly their narrative changed when things got messy. And then, a couple of weeks after I heard the news, the calls started. At first, it was just unknown numbers that I let go to voicemail. The first message was almost unrecognizable. It was Julian's voice, but it was thick with tears, broken by sobs. "Audrey, it's me. I made a terrible mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. Please, I need to talk to you. I need your help." I deleted it without a second thought. His circus, his monkeys. Not my problem. But he was persistent. The calls kept coming, always from a different number. The voicemails became a daily occurrence, a desperate, pathetic chronicle of his self-inflicted misery. There were the apologetic messages, where he would go on and on about how what we had was real and pure, and he had thrown it all away for a lie. There were the angry, blame-filled messages, where he would describe in detail the hell Scarlett had put him through, as if he were the sole victim in this entire saga. Then came the pleas. "I know I hurt you," he'd cry into the phone. "But everyone deserves a second chance. I'm a different person now. I know what's important." He called me his biggest mistake so many times it became a meaningless refrain. It was all a transparent, manipulative performance. He wasn't a redeemed man, he was a desperate man whose first choice had blown up in his face, and now he was crawling back to his safety net. His messages would sometimes turn angry and entitled when I didn't respond. "How can you be so cruel, Audrey? I'm telling you I'm in pain, and you just ignore me? After everything we shared? I thought you were a better person than that." The sheer nerve of it was astounding. He was indignant that I wasn't rushing to soothe the wounds he'd received from the woman he had chosen over me. Grant was incredibly patient through all of it. I told him about the calls, and he just listened, his expression calm. "You should change your number," he said simply one night, after Julian had left 3 tearful voicemails in a single evening. "Your peace of mind is more valuable than his drama." I knew he was right. The constant barrage was exhausting. But before I had a chance to go to the phone store, Julian escalated things. He went from pathetic to terrifying. It was a Saturday morning. Grant had stayed over, and we were in the kitchen, making pancakes, laughing about something stupid. It was a perfect, normal morning. And then came the pounding on my front door. It wasn't a knock. It was a frantic, desperate banging, like someone was trying to break the door down. We looked at each other, our smiles vanishing. I went to the peephole, my heart sinking. It was Julian. And his mother, Carol, was standing right beside him, her face a mask of grim determination. He looked awful. His eyes were red and puffy, his hair was unkempt, and he was wearing a stained sweatshirt. This was the woman who had told me to be happy for her son. Now she was on my doorstep, his accomplice in this pathetic ambush. I backed away from the door. "Don't answer it," I whispered to Grant. But they kept pounding, louder now. "Audrey, I know you're in there," Julian yelled, his voice cracking. "Your truck is in the driveway. Please, just talk to me for 5 minutes." Grant looked at me, his expression firm. "We're not going to be held hostage in your own home," he said quietly. And before I could protest, he walked to the door and opened it. The silence that followed was instantaneous and absolute. Julian's fist was still raised, ready to pound again. His jaw dropped when he saw Grant standing there, calm and solid in my doorway. His eyes flickered from Grant to me, standing just behind him. His face went through a rapid series of emotions, shock, confusion, and then a flash of pure, ugly rage. He had come here expecting to find me alone and vulnerable. He hadn't counted on Grant. "Audrey," he stammered, his eyes wide. He looked past Grant, directly at me. I had to see you. We have to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, Julian," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I stepped up to stand beside Grant, putting a hand on his arm. Carol, his mother, found her voice first. She put on a sad, concerned expression that I knew was completely fake. "Audrey, dear," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Julian has been through such a terrible ordeal. That woman, she was a monster. He made a terrible mistake, and he knows that now. Funny how Scarlett was a monster now, but just a few months ago she was his soulmate. What we had was real," Julian pleaded, his eyes welling up with tears. "That thing with Scarlett, that was just a moment of insanity, a fantasy. It wasn't real. You and I, we had a foundation. We had 4 years. You took a wrecking ball to that foundation, Julian," I replied, my voice cold. His mother tried again, stepping forward. "He's a good man, Audrey. He just got confused. He learned his lesson. Surely you can find it in your heart to give him another chance." "I have forgiven him," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "I forgave him for my own sake, so I could move on. But forgiveness and trust are 2 very different things. Forgiving is about letting go of anger. It's not about giving someone a second chance to shatter your life." "But why?" Julian cried, his voice cracking. "Why won't you even try?" "Because I don't trust you," I said, the simple truth of it landing with a heavy thud in the space between us. "You showed me who you are when you chose her. You are a person who is capable of abandoning a 4-year commitment for a cheap thrill." It wasn't confusion, Julian. It was a choice. A selfish choice. You wanted to keep me in your back pocket as your safe option while you went to see if the grass was greener. And when you found out it was just spray-painted concrete, you came running back, expecting me to be waiting. He started sobbing then, open, gulping sobs. "Everyone makes mistakes," he cried. "This wasn't a mistake," I said. "This was a betrayal. You had your chance. You had 4 years. You had an engagement ring. And you threw it all in the garbage for a 6-month nightmare. That nightmare is the consequence of your choices. It is not my job to fix it." Carol made one last, desperate attempt. "Audrey, please," she said, her voice laced with manufactured sincerity. "Aren't you willing to even consider taking back a man who finally understands what he lost?" I looked at Julian, a crying, broken man on my doorstep. Then I looked at Grant, my calm, steady partner standing beside me. And the final piece of my own healing clicked into place. He doesn't understand what he lost, I said quietly, but my voice carried in the morning air. He just understands that his first choice didn't work out, and he discovered that his plan B was safer. And that, Carol, is not the same thing at all. If you're still listening, could you do me a huge favor and hit the like button and comment the number 1 down below? That lets me know you're still here with me on this journey. Your support means the world to me and keeps me going. So please, comment with a 1, and I'll tell you the rest of what happened. Throughout this entire, excruciating exchange, Grant was my anchor. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. His solid presence beside me spoke volumes. Julian's mother, at one point, had the nerve to ask Grant how long we'd been together. He answered her politely, without a trace of defensiveness. His maturity, his quiet confidence, was a stark contrast to Julian's blubbering, theatrical despair. Julian's anger finally flared through his tears when he realized he was getting nowhere. "So you just moved on that fast?" he spat, gesturing at Grant. "What we had for 4 years meant nothing to you?" "I moved on after you left me for another woman," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "That's what people do, Julian. You ended our story. You don't get to be angry that I started writing a new one." I looked at the two of them, standing on my porch. The man who had destroyed our life for a fantasy, and the woman who had cheered him on until it all blew up. 10 months ago, I would have walked through fire for Julian. I had trusted him with my future, my heart, my vulnerability. Today, he was just a ghost from a past life, a painful lesson I had finally learned. He was a man who had made a series of catastrophic decisions and now wanted me to shield him from the consequences. "No," I said, the word simple and final. "The answer is no." The finality of it seemed to hit them both like a physical blow. Julian's sobs subsided into a shocked silence. Carol just stared, her mouth slightly agape, as if she couldn't comprehend that her emotional blackmail hadn't worked. They stood there for another long, awkward minute, a silent, pathetic tableau on my doorstep. Maybe they were hoping I would crack, that I would change my mind. But there was nothing left to say. Julian had made his choice. He had lived the consequences. And now he was pretending he could just press a rewind button. But life, thankfully, doesn't have a rewind button. Finally, they turned and walked back to their car in a defeated silence. Grant quietly closed the front door, the solid click of the deadbolt locking into place sounding like the final punctuation mark on a long, painful chapter of my life. He turned to me, his eyes soft with concern. "Are you okay?" I let out a long, slow breath I didn't realize I had been holding. And I smiled. A real, genuine smile. "Yeah," I said, feeling a profound sense of calm settle over me. "I really am." I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was free. The confrontation hadn't been draining, it had been liberating. It left me with one simple, powerful certainty. I was not the same woman Julian had left behind. He had gambled, believing I would always be his safe place to land, his guaranteed stability after his reckless adventure failed. He had profoundly misunderstood. This wasn't about pride or getting revenge. It was about clarity. I had finally learned that you don't have to beg for love, and you certainly can't resurrect a trust that has been deliberately incinerated. Grant didn't need to hug me or offer words of comfort. His steady presence was all the comfort I needed. What he represents in my life isn't a replacement for what I lost, it's a revelation of what I actually deserve. A relationship built from the ground up on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect, not one patched together with desperate regrets. I walked to the living room window and peeked through the blinds. I watched their car pull away from the curb and disappear down the street. I didn't feel a pang of sadness. I didn't feel a flicker of anger. I just felt nothing. A peaceful, welcome nothing. I let the blinds fall back into place, closing the curtain on my past. I turned back to Grant, who was standing in the kitchen doorway, watching me with a quiet smile. "So," I said, my own smile widening. "Are those pancakes ever going to get made, or what?" "I'm starving." He laughed, a warm, wonderful sound that filled the quiet spaces of my house. And just like that, without any grand declarations or dramatic pronouncements, we moved on. Because sometimes, you don't need to keep looking in the rearview mirror to know, with absolute certainty, that you're finally on the right road. Thank you all so much for listening to my story today. It means a lot to be able to share it with you. If you've ever been through anything like this, or if any part of this resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Your stories and your support mean the world. And if you haven't already, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. Take good care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.